Do you have any advice for writers on getting the career they most want, the writing career, and then first off, how do they even know what that looks like?
Yeah. So I want to relay something that my favorite, one of the smartest agents ever, what she said when she came to my UCLA class. So step one, ask yourself, if I was guaranteed success, absolutely guaranteed success, doing anything as a writer, what would I be doing? And I want you to be specific. So don't say, I want to write features. Do you want to write Academy Award nominated winning features? Do you want to be writing, directing small interpersonal movies? Do you want to be writing big popular culture successful movies that everyone's talking about? Don't say, I want to be doing 60-minute TV. What kind of 60-minute? Be very specific. And what I really urge people to do is, for this exercise, don't constrain yourself by what you think is possible. Like if you're like, I'd love to create comedy shows, but I don't know if I'm funny enough. Well, the answer is, if you were guaranteed success, what would you be doing? And why? And I think that's a question writers should ask themselves at least twice a year. And anyone who's newer to this journey, absolutely something to ask yourself. And I think part of your question was, well, if someone's new and inexperienced enough, maybe they're not entirely sure. That's okay. Just write down today what your answer would be. Your answer can change over time as you get more experience and more education, but know what it is that know what you would do if you were guaranteed success. And then the agent said, now, hear me when I tell you, nobody gets the career they want. You get the career you deserve. So the key is, figure out the career you most want, then figure out how to deserve that career. And I'll get there in a second, but I just want to do a little quick personal thing, which is, when we walk, where we look is where we move. That's our intent. So when I was a young writer at UCLA, I was very insecure, didn't know if I had what it took, don't come from wealthy parents, I was on student aid, and I really have this idea of, I need to know if this is going to work out for me, because if it isn't, I'm going to law school. And so I made a promise to myself that within 1 year I was going to sell a script. And 13 months later, I sold a pitch to Ridley Scott, and I was willing to say that counts. And then Ridley said he was making the movie. It was front page of Variety, and I was getting all of these offers to write projects, high-profile projects for money. At least for me, I didn't know people made that kind of money. I don't come from money. But what I realized is these weren't the kind of things I wanted to be writing. They were the kind of movies I'd want to see, but I don't want to write these. It's not creatively fulfilling. I want to be doing these. And I was stupid or naive, or both, enough to call my agent and say, hey, I'm getting all of these offers, but I really want these kind of offers. I want to be doing this. And my agent took a really long pause, I think, just to figure out how the nicest way to say this. But in her own very, very sweet way, what she said is, if you wanted that career, why didn't you write the spec scripts that get you that career? Because you wrote the spec scripts that get you this career. And she said, this is your career, so you're going to follow this career for 5 years, and you're going to nail it, knock it out of the park. And after 5 years, if you want to start talking about how you might change the industry perception of you and how you might want to bend your career over there, we can do that. But if I'm representing you for the next 5 years, this is your career because that's the career you launched. So there was a really important question. If that's the career I want, why did I write a script that launches this career? And the answer was, I never asked myself what kind of career I wanted. My intent was to launch a career, and I achieved that. My intent wasn't to launch the career I most want. And I work with writers routinely who have careers who come to me and they're like, I want to change my career. I want to change what I'm known for. I want to change the trajectory of my career. And they have very similar stories. So it takes a lot of effort, a lot of training, a lot of hard work to launch a career. If you're going to do that, you might as well do it in service of a career you most want. Or at least that ought to be your plan A. At some point, someone can say, I've done all this training, I've done all this dedication, this is the career I want, it's just not happening for me. maybe there's a career I'm more suited for. Maybe there's a different kind of writing. Maybe it's not what I most love doing, but maybe I can make a living doing that. That's plan B. And certainly, or writers will do that. At some point, they're like, this isn't working, let me go to plan B. But for so many people like myself, I just started with plan B. And for a lot of writers, maybe they would have gotten what they most wanted if they went there. So that's why it's so important, I believe, to start with, what is the career you most want? And why? Because I think you owe it to yourself to do what's required to give yourself a shot at that. Okay, now the question becomes, you know the career you most want. How do you deserve that career? Then, of course, it is writing the right scripts. But what people have to realize is it's not a good script. It's not a great script. It's an exceptional script. So let me tell you a true story. Bruce Springsteen, one of the greatest rock and roll gods of all time. He talks a lot about his life in the Netflix special, but there's a documentary also if you can watch on the making of Born to Run.
Oh, that sounds good. Yeah.
Is really, if you're like me and you're a nerd of the creative process, it's amazing. So Bruce Springsteen, one of the most talented musicians to ever walk the earth, dedicated, while his friends are going to college and start, jobs and starting families, he was just playing music for free or for no money. He was just all in on he wanted to be a rock star, and he was all in. And he was mega talented, and he got a record deal, which almost nobody got. And they promoted it, and they marketed it, and they made radio stations play his music. This is the 1970s. There's no internet. There's no Spotify. There's no iTunes. If radio stations don't play your music, no one knows who you are. They don't want to play an unknown person. But Columbia Records could say, do you want the new Fleetwood Mac album? Do you want that you're going to play Bruce Springsteen this number of times, and we're going to have people listening to make sure. So all of that, and the record came out, and it bombed. Now, I always have someone come up to me who's mad. They're like, it was brilliant, I'm not saying it wasn't artistically brilliant. I'm saying it commercially bombed. Bruce says that. And he got something very few people get in the record business, a second chance. And he poured heart and soul, and he knew the second album, it was this or he was giving up his dream. And the second album came out, and it bombed. And God smiled on him because he got a third chance. And that third album was Born to Run. His first two albums sold 42,000 copies. Born to Run, 10 million copies. Born to Run is considered one of the 5 greatest albums of all time. He became and remains a rock god. In the 1970s, if you want to be famous, there's 2 ways to do it. Be on the cover of People magazine or Newsweek magazine. He was on the cover of both in the same week.
Oh, wow.
So here's the question. And this is the question that anyone who, once you know the career you most want, how you deserve it, here's my question for you. What was different about Bruce Springsteen's third album than the first 2 albums? The most popular guess I get is luck. Gotta be in the right place at the right time, catch lightning in a bottle. Luck is an excuse. Born to Run was a transcendent album. It would have been uber successful if it was released 5 years earlier, 5 years later if it was released today. It is transcendent. It's not luck. Yes, you can write an amazing script, and if you're not in the right place at the right time, it may not sell or get made. That is true. But if you write a transcendent script, you will launch a career. People want to work with you. They'll want to hear your pitches. They'll want to staff you. So it's not luck. The other answer I get is that he found his voice. He found his authentic voice. No, you go to the first 2 albums, and it is his authentic voice. It is Bruce. You hear that talent and that voice and that melancholy and that aching and that strength. He had his voice honed in those first 2 albums. So he didn't find his voice. He didn't get lucky. So what is the difference? And the answer is Neil Landau. And Bruce Springsteen talks about it in this documentary. Neil Landau was a reporter for the Rolling Stone who was a big fan of those first 2 albums and came on board as a producer. And he produced Bruce Springsteen's third album. And they talk about it in this documentary, both Neil and Bruce. What Neil Landau did was he changed Bruce Springsteen's process. Evolved Bruce Springsteen's process just that much. And changing his process, because process is how we create product. Changing the process that much can be the difference between a failure and being a rock god, or a failure in being an A-list writer. I see this with writers, they're like this close. And so it's changing your process, it's evolving your process. And almost every A-list writer I know will say, there was someone in my life, a manager, a showrunner, a producer, who helped me see a different creative way of doing this, an evolved way of doing it, changing your process. So that is so key for someone who's like, this is the career I want. The way I deserve it is to write just exceptional scripts. Okay, how do I write exceptional scripts? Well, talent, make sure that you have properly trained yourself to create characters and dialogue that are compelling conflict. I did all this in a Film Courage video, The Essential Tools. So you can go back and watch that video. Then often the missing piece, and this is what I do I have a 3-workshop series, and the first 2 workshops are really teaching those skill sets. And the 3rd workshop is all about process. And it's all about evolving your process. There's a lot of things I do in that workshop. I'll share one with your audience. I'll share one specific tool. And just to be clear, this is just one of like 15 tools that are really important, but here's one. And one of the tools that I teach is the clarity index. And so it's a very simple tool. When you are trying to design and execute an exceptional script, so it's not following the rules, it's not paradigm driven, it's not predictable, it's not character serving preordained plot points, but you're trying to write a script like Russian Doll or Breaking Bad pilot, Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, or Fleabag, or we could go on and on and on. Then you're creating something original. And I guarantee you, there's going to be at least one or more times in that process that's going to get really hard, and it's going to be really difficult to figure something out. How do I motivate the character to do this? Or how do I solve this dilemma that the character's in? Or there's a wide range of structural design issues that can be really challenging. Every writer goes through that. So when you're trying to solve a really challenging creative problem, I ask people to think about a spectrum between 1 and 10. And 1 is, I have no idea in the world how to do this. I don't know the answer. I don't even know where to start looking. I am completely lost. And a 10 is when you can concisely and precisely answer it. When people hear that answer, they're like, yes. If you go back and look at the creative integration video for Film Courage, like their intuitive instinct just goes yes, and their conceptual analytical brain goes yes. So a 10 is the answer, and you can say it. The more we have to talk, the less we know. You can say it concisely and precisely, and in a room, everyone's just going to look at you and go yes. So that's a 10. And a 1 is no idea. I don't even know where to look. So a 5 is like, I have a sense the idea is over here. I think it's sort of shaped this way, but I don't know what it is. An 8 is, I know the answer, but I can't precisely tell it to you. If you let me talk, as I talk, it's in there somewhere. Maybe you can help me find it, because I know it's here, but I don't know exactly where it is, exactly what it is. That's like an 8. A 3 would be, I don't know the answer, but I have a pretty good sense I should look in this direction. Okay, so this is the spectrum. So the first thing that I want to train people to do is know where you are. Know where you are. And understand that if you're trying to write a script that can change your life, that can launch your career, I work a lot, right now, I used to work with writers who were trying to launch their careers. I don't do that anymore. I do that in my workshops, but one-on-one, I primarily work with people who've been staffed on shows who are trying to get to the next level. So I tell them, inherently, you're going to be at a 1 or a 2 in the beginning. Here's one of the most important things. What is your relationship with being at a low number? A lot of writers get really stressed. They get anxious. It's very uncomfortable. You're working on a script, you're like, if I can't solve this problem, the script doesn't work. And I have no idea how to solve this problem. I've been thinking about it for 3 days, and the example I give that I can relate to is whenever I park in a large parking garage, I can never find my car. So if I'm walking through a large parking garage, I know my car is there, but I can't find it, it gets frustrating. But imagine if I don't even know if I drove the car there. Now imagine if I don't even know if I have a car. Because when you're at a low number on this clarity spectrum, you don't know the answer. You don't know if there is an answer. And if there is an answer, you don't know if you're going to find it. You may not be able to find it. There's no guarantee. And that freaks people out. And they get very stressed and uncomfortable. And what we know about human beings is there's an automatic part of our brain that wants to, when we get stressed and freaked out, wants to soothe and comfort ourselves. And we have different ways of doing it. Here's a whole bunch of really destructive ways writers soothe themselves when they're really freaked out about a really tough problem. They have no idea if they can figure it out or not. Unfortunately, I can relate to almost all of these strategies. So one strategy is to convince yourself it's not a problem. I'm overthinking this. I'm making a mountain out of a molehill. No one else is even going to see this problem. And then that calms you down, soothes you down, lets you keep writing. And then down the road, when you give the script to someone that you trust, you're going to find out that this was a glaring problem for them and the whole script doesn't work. So you're just kicking the can down the road. One of my favorite strategies was to then, another possible strategy is to say, nah, it's a really big problem. It's got to be solved. And then I come up with a kind of decent answer that's like a 5 on the clarity spectrum, and I convince myself it's a 10. I have an answer that kind of works, but it's not a really great answer, and I'm like, perfect. Once again, you're going to get your comeuppance when people read your script, people you trust, because you didn't solve the problem. Another mistake that people will make is they'll say, there just is no solution to this problem. That's why no one's done a TV show. I hear people say this all the time. Like, if Breaking Bad didn't exist, I could see someone saying, that's why no one's done a TV show about a guy who cooks crystal meth, because there's no way to care about that guy. No one wants to spend time with a guy who cooks crystal meth. Crystal meth is a scourge of the universe. Or, no, I have this great idea of doing a spy story where the protagonists are Russian spies. They're Russian spies. They come to America. They were KGB agents. They speak perfect English. They have kids. They pretend to be married, and they undermine the American way. And everyone's like, ooh, that's an interesting concept. And then it's like, yeah, but no one cares about these people. What are the stakes? They're going to get caught. Oh, no, they're going to get caught killing Americans, undermining the American way. They're the enemy. Well, of course, that guy figured out how to do that script, and the Americans changed his life. Not only did he sell that script, he was a showrunner in year 2, and that has won so many Emmys and best drama. And my point is, any script that's going to change your life has something about it that's really hard to figure out. And so what a lot of writers will do is they'll say, yeah, I've been at it for 3 or 4 days or a week. There's no solution. That's why no one's done a show like this. Or maybe there's a solution that someone smarter than me can figure out, and they just put that script away. There are so many writers who had an instinct for something unique and special and amazing, had something really difficult to figure out, struggled with it, and then just put that in a drawer. That script would have changed their life, but it went into a drawer. The reality is the writers who we all admire, the writers who create amazing shows, David Chase really wanted to do a show about what it's like to feel like your mom is just crushing your life out of you. It's like she's killing you, but you can't escape her because you're a Roman Catholic. It's your mom. And he couldn't figure out how to do that with stakes. It took him 2 years. He talks about this, 2 years to figure it out. He finally figured it out, a little project called The Sopranos. So the point being, how many people have a Sopranos or a Breaking Bad or a Fleabag that's just in their drawer? And it took the difference between David Chase and most writers, or Jenji Kohan, and I think she said it took her like 11 months to figure out how to do and solve some of the problems in Orange is the New Black. The difference between Jenji Kohan and David Chase isn't that they don't start at a low number. It isn't that they struggle. It isn't that they're lost. It isn't they go down a lot of dead alleys or blind alleys that don't go anywhere. That's not what's different for them. What's different is they don't give up. And they have a process to get to a 10, but they don't give up. So many writers give up. They rationalize away the problem. They rationalize that a okay solution is a brilliant solution. Or they just say, well, that's why no one I have this great concept, but that's why no one's done it, because it can't work. Or the classic, I need a vacation from this. I'll put it in a drawer, work on something else, and I'll go back to this. And then they acquire a drawer full. So what's really important is to train yourself to expect to be at a low number and to relax into the unknown. To be okay. And then to have a process to start moving up. Instead of trying to find the solution, start brainstorming possible ways of approaching the solution. Always be looking for options. Always be brainstorming possibilities. That's the way, because when you're trying to find the right solution, you're so constricted, and that judgmental part is coming in and throwing things away. Like, nah, it's not perfect. But if you're brainstorming options, if you're just brainstorming options for ways to find options, then you can relax that critical judgmental mind and you can start wandering. And then you start moving up and you start to have a sense and an idea and you start to move up, and most writers will stop at a 9. A lot of writers don't know what a 10 feels like. And so they're always stopping at a 9. So one of the things that I do in the workshops is I will bring in a creative problem that a writer I worked with had, and how this was their first idea and how to solve it, and it clearly isn't very good. And then how they got all the way here to a really good solution, but it was like a 9. And then I give them the 10. And you can feel the difference. I can't do this here because I have permission to do it in the workshops, but people can go through Film Courage videos. There's a lot of great writers talking and sharing their stories. And what I would be looking for is, so there are writers who are going to talk about how they got into business, they're going to talk about this project, they're going to talk about how this came together, and all of that's really interesting. It can be educational and inspiring. But what I would really pay attention to is a writer, and I know that this exists in a lot of the interviews, is look for a writer who's talking about a really difficult creative process or creative problem they're trying to solve, and then they give what the actual solution was, and you'll feel it. You'll feel like in so few words, they just nailed it. So you need to know what a 10 feels like to hold yourself to a 10. So to sort of wrap this all together, I'll share a true story. My wife has a cousin whose dream was to be a baseball player. And he was the best high school baseball player in the eastern half of the United States. And long story short, when all his friends went to college, he went to the Yankees. He was 18 and he went to the Yankees, but in the minor league system, the like AAA. And he was an Adonis, a man amongst boys. He broke all the batting home run records, defensive player of the year. And this guy was going to be one of the greatest baseball players of all time. And at a pretty young age, the Yankees brought him up to the majors. And he was playing with his heroes. And he was just striking out. He couldn't hit the ball. So that's okay. They gave him a batting coach, a psychology coach, couldn't hit the ball. So they put him back down the minor, like home run, home run, home run, brought him back up to the major, strikeout, strikeout. That's okay. And they just kept doing this for like 4 years, and they eventually cut him. Another team, the Cleveland Indians, picked him up. Same thing, same cycle. They cut him. Another team. Went through 3 teams, same thing. In the minor leagues, broke records. In the major league, he could not hit the ball. And then that was over. He was 27 years old, and it was over. Now, he saved his money. He went to architect school, met a wonderful woman. They're married, have kids. He's very happy. But here's I learned this whole thing because I was with him at a wedding, and we were walking from point A to point B, which meant walking over some grass. He wouldn't do it. He walked a mile out of his way to not go on grass. And his wife's like, yeah, he won't walk on grass. We don't have grass in our house. He will never walk on grass his entire life. And I'm like, okay, I have to hear this story. Essential context, what is this all about? Sense memory, it reminds him, walking on grass reminds him of baseball. And it reminds him of his dream that he can't ever have. So he just never walks on grass. So I asked him, what's the difference between hitting the best minor league pitch and an average major league pitch? And he looked at me and he said, that's the difference. And writers don't understand that that doesn't seem like a lot, but when that's what stands between you and your dream, that's a lot. And I have writers that are sent to me by agents and managers who are this close. And on the clarity spectrum, they can get to a 9, and they think it's a 10. I mean, no one's gonna push that extra mile. They don't, if you think you've ran 26.2 miles, you're like, I've done the marathon, and you can stop. But what if you've only gone 25 miles? That's what a really good manager will do for you, is they will tell you this script is really good. It's not yet exceptional. You gotta make it that much better. Because nobody does that on their own because they don't realize it could be that much better. You know, when I was starting out, the greatest gift my manager gave me is he held me to a standard I didn't think I could hit. And he said, I know you can hit that standard. I don't know if he really thought that or not, but I needed to hear that. And so the clarity spectrum is not making the mistakes at the smaller number. Yeah, and as you go through life and you watch film courage videos or writer podcasts, or you go to events where you hear writers talk, you will hear writers talk about creative problems. Or if they talk about a creative problem but they didn't talk about the solution, try to social media them or go up to them after the event and just say, hey, I'm a writer and you were talking about in the script, you were struggling with this. I'm really curious, like, what was your process? How did you get to an answer? What was that answer? I do this all the time with writers. They're usually excited to share this. Usually when people come up to them, it's like, how do I get an agent? Well, you read my script. But if you approach a writer and you're like, I just want to learn what your process was and what was the solution, they'll share it with you. And if you do that, pay attention to how few words they use to give the answer, and how when you hear that answer, how it makes you feel. Like there's a tuning fork inside you where you're like, yeah, no, that's it, that's brilliant. And that's what a 10 feels like. And when you know what a 10 feels like, then you'll know when you're not quite there.
You had talked about in the last Film Courage interview that you read Rewrites, the memoir by Neil Simon.
Yeah.
And I just briefly skimmed the book on Amazon, and he kind of talked about the same thing in terms of being unhappy, working in LA on a television show. And he was like, if I don't, I think his quote was, if I don't start writing a Broadway play soon, I would inevitably become a permanent part of the West Coast topography. This very thought of that jump-started me to my desk. So, but do you think he was 30, I think, when he was talking about that? Do you think most writers know, they just kind of think about that same thing that you, like, I've got to get signed, I've got to get, and how do they even know that this is the wrong genre or type of writing job for them? Right. They might not.
So a mistake that I made, and I think I made a lot of stupid mistakes. This mistake, I don't beat myself up too much because I think this is a pretty understandable mistake, and I see writers make this, which is just because you love a certain TV show or a certain movie or a certain genre, just because you love a certain TV show or a movie or a certain genre doesn't mean you love writing it. It might. I mean, Fleabag is your all-time favorite TV show, and you could write something like that. You might love it. You might not. So what I'd suggest is, especially if you're new, instead of picking this is the kind of writer I'm going to be, play with it and write 10 or 15 pages of this kind of a thing and 10 or 15 pages of this kind of thing. And don't worry if it's great. Don't worry about the engine and the concept and all that. Just see, what is my experience in writing these pages? Just experiment. It's like being a young kid in an attic and you try on different clothes and you pretend to be different people. What type of writing really excited you? I'll tell you, one of the things that I have routinely see when I'll work with a writer, we always start with an entry, an initial kind of interview conversation. And the writer will always say, this is the kind of stuff I write. This is what I think's in my wheelhouse. This is the stuff that I would suck at. And I always make them try to do what they think they'd suck at. Like, again, not an entire script. Maybe just a couple days, an assignment. It's not that uncommon that someone, when they do this, it's like, holy shit, it's so good. And I loved it. And I've seen writers who've had this career, and they play around with what they know they wouldn't be good at, and they go on to have huge careers. I'm not saying that's always the case. So experiment, sort of. Just like maybe when someone's a young person, they're not really sure who they want to be in a long-term relationship. Maybe you date around and you meet different people and you date different people. Maybe date people you wouldn't think of dating, just to see what the experience is like. The same, date different kinds of writing. But yeah, it is common that writers will have a career and then discover that's not what I want to be doing. That's very common. I mean, just talk to agents or managers. I have a lot of good friends or agents. They hear this all the time.